So to set the stage, we know that Indigenous representation in tech is 0.7%, when the representative population in BC specifically is 5.9%. So that's setting the bar, and thankfully BC Tech was like, well, who knows stuff about this? And we've got three amazing people that have experience in that are attempting things, that are wrestling with this. And I've got to say, none of us have the exact answer, the perfect solution, but I think together, as we're learning together and kind of sharing our journeys. And in a sense, I feel like today, like looking at Helen and kind of what I know about her to date, it's almost like Helen's like, hey, I've got this journal here of what we're attempting right now. I'm gonna share it with you. So it's almost like we're getting the private insights into Helen's journal. We're getting the private insights into Josh's diary. So diary of a gaming kid, right? So this is very exciting, this time together. There we go. Like there's his diary right there. Michaelin, also with you, I know you've got a really cool journal at home, and this is your journal, and we're going to get a dance into it. So without further ado, Helen, why don't we start with you? Introduction, a bit more about yourself, what you are working on, wrestling with, and kind of what you've been attempting to do to change that statistic for the better.
Well, thanks so much. I really love the idea of looking into my journal because much like all other aspects of my journal, I would say I'm not good enough. I think, we've been working for a number of years at Stem Cell on Indigenous inclusion, both in very specific, meaningful ways, and also just in terms of educating ourselves as executives. I'm hoping you guys can hear me because I feel like I'm frozen right now. Can you hear me?
You're great. You're very great. We
Okay,
can hear you.
great.
You sound good. You got a beautiful painting behind you of a beach.
I do, of Tofino. Yeah, that's Chesterman Beach behind me.
Really
so
cool.
yeah, we've been working in earnest, both specifically and also on educating ourselves as a senior leadership team and as an organization about issues of Indigenous inclusion and exclusion. But I think there's so much more that we can all do, and I think that we can do more collectively than we can individually as companies. So I'm very excited to be part of this conversation.
And the company that you work for, just to catch us up.
Stem Cell Technologies. I didn't want to introduce that because Erica did such a lovely job of introducing us all, I think, already.
She did good. She's really good at that. She's like, you almost want to like take her places to be like, can you just introduce me? Like those people when you go to parties back in the day, and they'd be like, everyone welcome Shane Goodman to the party. Or Kim Abels is joining Zoom, but we don't get those. So we just put up with, the ding sounds like a weird doorbell. Josh, over to you. Tell us about what your company is attempting to do. Share a bit about kind of what you're wrestling with at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders at Eastside Games. We've been around for, I think 12 years now, and I've been in tech for 20 years. And Eastside Games makes games and the platforms that change it, including working with developers all over the world to tell basically interactive stories from new IPs. What we're doing mainly is just kind of start to talk about this so we can get collectives, minds, and smart people together to try to figure out how to solve this problem, and then move on to other DEI efforts as well, because this work is never done. And like I've been in tech 20 years, and it's always been I just want to change the conversation. And if you leave here thinking about one thing, it should be changing the conversation about the problem isn't the applicants. The problem is on companies trying to connect the applicants, because in tech 20 years, it's always like, of course, we want to have a more diverse workforce. Of course, we want to hire more Indigenous people. They're just not applying. So I think a lot of the conversation we'll touch on today, how it'll work in your organization, is how you make your organizations comfortable for Indigenous people. And I actually think that, I know for most organizations that statistic is wrong, the 0.7%. I think that's 0.7% that identify themselves. But once again, going back to kind of decolonializing I said that wrong. Thinking is to make sure that, it's not really, that's not really like a natural thing to self-identify right away into a company. And we have to work on making that normal and making it just be you work at the company, not you're an Indigenous person working at the company. So I think there's a lot of things to unpack. And the other thing too is it's not a silver bullet. There's some things that we've had some very small steps forward in companies that the company that I have and companies that I worked for and that I mentor, but it's different for every single organization.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. A shout out to Pamela, who shared where she, which land she is on, which is very cool. Pamela, I saw you were trying out that app. That's very, very cool. I think what's great about this session and that BC Tech put this on, because I think like Josh shared, no one's figured it out. There's no silver bullet, there's no answer, but I think you're getting to hear from people that have been trying things. And in some ways it's almost better, because sometimes you can bring in the consultant or read a book and think like, that's what I need to do. And it seems miles away and so far off and it's not doable or possible. But I think from today, I think one of the greatest things we're going to get is, hey, here's some kind of baby steps. Here's some small ways you can make change. Here's some things that we've attempted and failed. Here's things that we've attempted and worked well. So if anyone is a note taker, so maybe it's Sean, you got a really cool shirt on, so maybe you're a great note taker, or Jen, Owen, maybe back to you, Shane, or Stu, whoever is a note taker. If you want to do your notes in Google Docs, if you're a Google Doc note taker and want to share the link in the chat, we want to do a shared note take, that'd be amazing. Some actionable items, because it's always good to share, because sharing is caring. James Matthews, I think he's going to be excited about that, because he's excited to share some notes. Mikeland, over to you.
Thanks, Darian. So I'm from SAP Canada, and I've been there for since 2018, but I've been working in tech my entire career. So since the early 90s in BC. And so at SAP, what we've been doing is mid 2020, we got a group of people together and some commitment from the senior leaders in Canada to really grapple with the idea of what does it mean for us, for a corporation, SAP Canada. How do we try to get in better relations? Trying to take from the TRC 92 call to action. And so we partnered with the First Nations Technology Council as our first step, and they did an audit, and they created a whole bunch of actions for us and a roadmap. And then we kept the steering committee together and added more people based on, what the recommendations were. And now we're trying to go through and implement them and really try to make some change. So that's where we're at.
That's awesome. Thanks, Michael. And I'm sure we'll unpack some of those specific things over this time we have together. So jumping right in, maybe share about some of the ways that you've been making pathways for Indigenous talent to get involved in the tech sector. What have you been trying to kind of, in a sense, kind of forge that ground, open up doors, maybe kick down doors, maybe kind of take away the brush and the things in the way? Michael, we're going to go back to you and then go back.
Sure. Yeah. So we do have a lot of different work streams. I would say that one of the things that's really, really important is for us as the current employee base, and for all of us to really have some good learning and understanding of past and present, and trying to really talk about like really complex subjects. And a lot of people. Many people I know who've grown up here are quite astounded and amazed, if they're like I am, and settler experience, that they didn't learn these things, and that's true. And I would say for myself that it's also that even if I learned it in school, it certainly was negated by the experience I saw around me, and that sort of really deep casual racism and systemic racism. So I think that's really, really important for people to really kind of understand and know that we all have a lot of unlearning to do. So that's one track. We have a community kind of track where we sponsor a lot of things and do donations for usually for talent that's a little bit earlier, because we know this is a long road for change. We also have developed an employee resource group. We have a lot of those. And then what the work stream that I'm on is about, really looking at recruiting and retention and promotion and really trying to understand that. So those are different things we're working on.
That's cool. And Helen, over to you.
Yeah, I should mention, and probably should have mentioned in my intro, that Stem Cell's a very large organization by BC standards. So anything that I say should be framed through that, because we're 2,000 employees, over 1,600 here in Vancouver. And so the resources that we have to put to these initiatives are going to be different than smaller companies that I've worked with in BC in the past. And so similar to SAP, we have similar programs. We have an employee resource group that is for Indigenous and Indigenous allies. And most recently, for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, Stem Cell did a week-long education campaign, including, some light stuff like storytelling from an Indigenous storyteller, all the way through more challenging conversations about how to be an effective ally and everything in between. And we had very, very high participation in that kind of activity. It's the second year we've run a series like this, and I think our community is getting more and more engaged in the conversation as a result. There are a number of other activities that go on in the organization around education, including employee-led work, and not Indigenous employee-led work, but employee-led work from allies who are interested in this topic, leading book clubs, conversations about inclusion in safe spaces. There's a group kicking up a series of conversations called Socially Awkward Socials that allow people to have challenging conversations with one another about issues of their own systemic racism and unidentified privilege. So all of those things I think are important in terms of creating a safer spaces, as Josh mentioned, for all of our equity and deserving employees at Stem Cell. And then, on the sort of front end of the wedge, for many years now, 4 or 5 years, we've been involved with a couple of charities. Inspire, which is a very well-known charity that provides scholarships for Indigenous kids, and also a series of conferences for them across the country. But also one that's more near and dear to my heart is a foundation called the Verna Kirkness Foundation, and they provide week-long scholarships for Indigenous youth in grade 11 to spend a week at universities all across the country to demystify what the university experience is like. And if you ever get a chance to go and see those students at the end of their first week, they're lit up with the excitement of what's possible for them on campus. And it definitely sort of sits in your heart about what's possible when we open up these career fields for Indigenous youth.
It's amazing. And I see Julia is putting links to some of those mentioned organizations. It's really great in the chat. Josh, over to you. Forging grounds, getting staff coming into your organization. What's it been like? What have you been trying to do?
Just talking about it nonstop. Probably everyone doesn't want me to talk about it anymore. And it's not often I'm the small company in the talk, so I think this is a good segue to talk about some things that we've done that you can get started even at the grassroots level if you're a smaller company or you have a smaller budget, because I don't think budget really plays into this. There's blockers we've been put up over the years on this, that everything from it's hard to hire Indigenous people because it's hard to reach Indigenous people, and that's not true. So many Indigenous people live in cities and are probably working at other organizations right now, and so there's lots of work we can do there while we continue to work with the government to make sure, of course, everyone has access to internet and access to be able to work from where they live, which BC's working hard on, and we can stand behind them on that. But going back to what you can do right away is we've now had 2 people. We're on the list for more from Digital Lift as well from BC Tech. So look into that and get some great people that have in the subject of relearning, it's also, you can catch me doing this rant on other talks, but I think education is a very colonial way that's meant for the privileged. And if you are able to get education, you should take that advantage, because it's a huge advantage in life, but not only for Indigenous people, but for people that don't have access to a major city or a place with a university, live remotely in the north, or just don't have the financial means. It's just, we've kind of, for the most part, left these people behind in tech. And that's something I really want to talk about a lot more, that we have to focus on retraining. We have to focus on remote learning through universities, or to going to community colleges, or getting sort of retooled to get back into the workforce. Digital Lift is great. We've hired some people with university educations that have just decided, hey, I want to go into tech, but how am I going to do that? That's a great first start. And then the other thing to think about as well is, as we go through, and I really believe this has to come from your leadership on a relearning and a refocus and a better understanding of working with Indigenous people, is just to make sure we don't forget to not just focus on September 30th, or focus on that, but also look at the inspiring leaders, and look at like what people are making in the industry, and look at the creations everyone's making. Like in BC, Lawrence Lewis at One Feather is making some amazing stuff about using blockchain to be able to help Indigenous people to vote, and getting lots of people to vote that way. You should look up his stuff on podcasts and stuff. And Jeff Ward from Anamiki, they were both at the awards, and both just like really inspiring for Indigenous-led organizations that do have mostly Indigenous people working for them. And then just also remember, like, a lot of the programs that you roll out, it's also about engaging and people learning, hands-on learning. So I think that's really great to have, not only just philanthropy, and where we have a number of places that we give to that are local and Canada wide, but also just on the relearning. So Imaginata is a great resource for a film festival that also is now kind of spreading out across Canada, and looking at everything from, we did a big collaboration with Section 35, who was named one of the top 5 menswear designers in the world. And he just has an exhibit at the Met that I went and saw as well. So we did a collaboration with this to kind of go through that process of working with somebody that's really successful in something outside of tech, but just seeing that creation process and letting our designers hands-on work with something with Section 35 was just, I think, is an amazing process that people need to see, to kind of break out of that shell, to ask questions, and to know that it's a complicated process, right? Like, they've taken, if you look at just even the term Indigenous person, you have to take all of the Métis people, all of the Inuit people, all of the First Nations people, hundreds and hundreds of distinct cultures, hundreds of languages, jam them all in one category and say, there you go, now you're a collective voice. And you just have to remember that in Canada, that's a very blanket term, and we have to make sure that there's very unique cultures that happen even within our own province, our own country, and that we just have to be aware of that. I don't think I answered the question.
No, it's great. No, Josh, it was awesome. So if we were to use the analogy of, like, the first question being, how are you making pathways, right? Pathways for Indigenous people to go into tech. So if you think of, like, pathway, there's barriers in that pathway. There's logs in the way, there's bushes, there's trees that have fallen. You know, you can think of even Stanley Park when you had that big storm and there's trees everywhere all over the park. It shut down for a while. It sounds like 2 things are happening, though. One is, how do we kind of clear the path? How do we take the logs off the path and the bushes out of the way? But then also, once people get into tech, how do we make sure our employees are ready? People on the water cooler are prepared. HR is ready and prepared. So maybe just go back to you, Helen, kind of like, energy wise and time and resources, kind of how much are you saying, hey, we want to be prepped and ready for when the pathways are open? And then maybe tell me about some of the ways that you're kind of clearing the path, and what does that look like? Or maybe you're saying, you know what, we're not ready to clear the path yet. We need to be ready here. We got to get our house in order first.
Yeah, I until I listened to Josh answer that question, I would have said, I think we're ready. You know, our path is cleared, right? We feel, you know, and exhibit evidence of being able to bring a group of people into our organization. But I really appreciate Josh continuing to challenge the question about education. You know, in the context of stem cell technologies, which is a biotech organization, you know, I am very aware of the and experience it daily of not having a PhD in science, you know, in immunology or other forms of science. And the sense of privilege that comes along with those who do have that. And you know, that I think it's a great question for us to ask ourselves: is that a barrier that we are you know, that is not necessary for a lot of the jobs that we have? And you know, could we, as a large organization, provide a training program for people to do certain levels of scientific work in our organization and open up a whole new talent pool for us? So I really appreciate every time Josh mentions that topic about the challenge to our own beliefs around the need for education. So, you know, notwithstanding that, you know, I do think that, you know, one of the barriers, well, I mean, to say one, right? You know, the whole education system is a barrier, and you know, the impact of the residential school experience on generations of Indigenous youth and their families is a massive barrier. And you know, it's going to take us a long time to reconcile that, you know, in the rest of Canada before we can really affect change in employment, I think. And that's why we've intentionally spent a lot of time and will continue to spend a lot of time addressing our own privilege and, you know, asking ourselves, you know, what biases are getting in the way of opening the way for greater employment. I do think one of the benefits of COVID is that we've all learned how to work remotely, and we used to talk about that a lot before COVID as an organization, about the barrier of internet access and remote work, and you know, not and how, you know, many of the jobs in BC are based in Vancouver, and that is automatically a barrier for many types of people to come and work for our organizations. Now we've sort of removed that barrier with technology, but I think we can all do better in terms of lobbying the government to provide resources at speed to Indigenous communities in the North, so that we can access those talent pools, and those people have reliable internet connections, you know, much less healthy drinking water and things like that. So, you know, these are systemic barriers that exist in our society, and we all need to sort of confront them, I think, so that we can start to remove them.
And Helen, so it sounds like you've been educating internally, which is amazing. And then the barriers to entry education. So would that be the reason Inspire has kind of been where you've been kind of investing your time and resources? And maybe unpack that a bit more for people that don't know Inspire.
Yeah, I mean, Inspire gives us a gateway to a conversation with Indigenous youth. I think, you know, initially we got involved with them to actually be able to show up at some of their conferences back in the days when we did in live and in-person conferences. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do that again, and use it as an opportunity to have conversations with many Indigenous youth about the careers that were available to them in STEM. So yeah, I think that's a part of why we got involved with them. As I said, you know, for me, actually, I think, you know, Inspire is a great organization, and they make it easy to be able to provide dollars to Indigenous youth, and they kind of do it all for you. And they're sort of, in my mind, at the scale of something like the United Way, right? If you want an easy organization to partner with that enable you to, put money in the right place at the right time, they're a great organization to partner with, and they can provide online donation portals for your organization and all kinds of things like that. I do personally like the Verna Kirkness Foundation because you have much more personal connections with people. And in terms of alignment with my values and with stem cells values, individual conversations and long-term relationships are things that we're interested in, and having each one of those youth go back into their communities, and maybe they're not the ones that are interested in education, but they can talk about an exciting experience that they had is far more impactful than anything I can ever do or say as an individual white woman of privilege, right? So, I think, I increasingly believe about diversity, equity, inclusion issues in general, that the real change happens at the individual level. We each have a personal responsibility to change. And if each of us changes, then the world changes.
That's great. Thanks, Helen. Josh, you jumped in there. Tell me about just letting people be aware. I think like that simple thing of, hey, you can work in tech. That sounds like an answer you're saying. Tell us about what that looks like and maybe how you're pushing away. And one of those barriers might just be, I didn't know I could do this job. Why don't you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I also want to just go back to another thing that we think about in big organizations, especially because I have worked in some big organizations when I started in tech, and that was in, I worked at Crystal Decisions, Bob J, SAP. It's been many names, but now it's SAP. I've worked there. I've worked for a TELUS-like organization. And remember, even your big organization, if the barrier is on you need a PhD to look at stem cells, which we probably should keep PhDs just looking at that. That's good. I don't think you can get a PhD at Douglas College, but you probably have about 100 to 200 supporting jobs. That is just a good way for people to get in. You need IT people. You need people that are able to do sysadmin. You need people that have built your websites, and you need people that are watching your web security and making sure your database is working. Because you probably don't want to get the PhDs that are looking at stem cells to do all those things, because you have to be trained for the right job. So that's how, the light bulb kind of went on when I was working in hospitality and I saw everyone doing tech jobs in hospitality. And I was like, I kind of want to be the IT guy at the Fairmont rather than working in banquets, because I do this stuff anyways. And it's not just the schools, it's just how we talk to youth that aren't in that don't grow up in privilege. And I heard a really great podcast from that Lawrence Lewis was speaking on, from One Feather, and he said everyone has privilege, but you don't realize you never realize when you're speaking out of privilege, because you're looking at it through a different lens. So growing up in a really small country school, they basically had career fair, and they're handing out what you want to do. And I was late for the career fair, so I just grabbed these 3 pamphlets and I took them home, and I'm like, well, these 2 look like they kind of suck. And my grandpa said I'm not allowed to work in the mill, so looks like my only option here is learning how to be a cook. And it was a great job because I got to travel and do all that. But like, that's literally what I did as a country kid to decide what I was going to do for a career. You either do what your parents are doing, or you grab a paper and put it on your wall, and then that's kind of what you decide to do. And I just think the conversation needs to be more around, I think we also we don't talk about how most jobs in tech you can figure out. Most entrepreneurs are self-made. Most people that build products don't go to school to learn how to build an amazing product, and instead you have to look at retraining or check out jelly marketing, go through that, like do these things and explore and do that. We have to stop when kids are building some amazing levels and Roblox, lean into that and figure out maybe there's a career here, maybe there's something you can do here, versus kind of limiting that. And I think that's going to be the biggest win, is just more people just telling the story, to be like, hey, I figured it out. You can figure it out. If I figured out how to become, with mentorship and hard work, how to become CEO of one of BC's gaming studios, very confident somebody else could do it.
That's awesome, Josh. When we launched our program for high school students, especially in Northern BC, they actually had us reword our school's name, because it was like digital marketing boot camp, and you would get micro credentials and certificates, and they renamed it. They took a page out of your book and they renamed it digital marketing trade school. And they said, you're, instead of getting 11 micro credentials, they said you're going to get 11 tickets, because they felt, as a school system, the career education services, that youth felt better and more comfortable with understanding tickets and trades versus tech and micro credentials.
Yeah, has anyone here ever seen logging equipment like up close? I'm sure a couple of people have. Like, they take people that are like right out of high school, as long as you're competent, and they're going to be like, I'm going to train you on how to drive this, how to use this, how to manage this saw, and you're going to learn how to do it in 3 weeks. And we're saying there's no way you could figure out how to manage a website or work in IT. Like, that's, you have to go to school for 2 years for that. Like, we literally have people in BC laying all sorts of infrastructure, working in complicated construction process, doing that. You have to get certified, you have to know what you're doing, but you don't have to go to school for 4 years to do it. And there's a whole workforce out there that we've mystified tech to say you can only do this if you have this complicated education, where a lot of it is obsolete by the time you leave school. So I'm saying we need both. I'm not saying like we should all go protest UBC after this. We still need UBC. You need universities. I'm saying there's two messages that, my very blue collar upbringing and seeing people that are basically running BC, with the blue collar people that are running BC, they're going to become tech companies too. They are tech companies, so they're going to need people to work on that. And this is how we can, fill all these tech jobs we're going to need in BC.
It's awesome, Josh. So great. Michaelin, over to you. SAP, not to be pronounced SAP, but SAP. Tell us about what you've been doing for clearing the roads, clearing the pathways, chopping down those bushes.
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, there's lots of things we're doing, but I'm going to focus more on the talent stuff. And I think for us, we sort of have some quick wins that we're trying to focus on, as well as, the longer term. And I really, really appreciate and agree with, there needs to be, both Helen and Josh said it, and others have as well, that we need to really look at what kind of training could we offer. Right now, for our quick wins, what we're trying to do is expand, the look at the roles that, as Josh said, look at the roles that we think could have different job description qualifications, change those job descriptions, talk to, the recruiters and the hiring managers about, really ensuring that, we're trying to minimize the mandatory requirements, because we want people who are interested to learn and are motivated to learn, and we can teach them from there. So that's the internal stuff. And then externally, working with more organizations that we haven't worked with before. So as I say, as the small quick wins, we are still focusing a lot on, post-secondary institutions. So I hear you also about the barriers and the cost and all of that, but we're expanding who we're talking to, and we're really trying to reach out and build relationships with, the Indigenous student centers in schools that we haven't talked to before, and then also the employment liaisons or employment advisors. And we do have some good connections and some really good people whom they've really been helping us, and really gratefully, I'm grateful they're providing their time to us. So I would say those are sort of starting points. And then, we really looked at, like, let's pick these roles, and then let's go to managers and talk to them about, are you willing to really actively look at these schools that maybe you haven't looked at before? Maybe you have a little bit of a bias there about what you're expecting. And then also, some people, even after the pandemic, are kind of eager to have a local team. So we're talking to managers who would be willing to have people from remote locations, because that really does open things up as well. And yes, definitely infrastructure problems. I'm currently in Manitoba right now, and I'm always shocked and angered by how I lose my service so quickly as soon as I get out of the city. So yeah, so I would say that's what I would say we're trying to do from talent perspective for removing barriers.
Michael, I'm gonna put you on the spot for a second. If you could, there's this great podcaster, author Malcolm Gladwell did this podcast recently called the Magic Wand Experiment. If you could just do this and this would happen. So Magic Wand Experiment, if you could wave a magic wand and change all the job descriptions in tech across Canada and in BC, what do you think are the 3 things that should need to change or would change that you found that would allow Indigenous people to feel like, wow, I want to work there. Wow, that's a pathway, a road I can feel comfortable going down.
I think for a lot of jobs, the post-secondary requirement could be removed, and it could be more of like a skills-based kind of testing that we did. I think also having more of a collaborative process for hiring, so that we're bringing people more to the table and not just having like the very, intimidating, strict and annoying, panels and all those kinds of things. And I did say the skills based, but also just recognizing that, like, again, it's about not testing, and this sort of idea of impersonal and formalized testing is not necessarily going to work for many people. And we know this from lots of different populations, right? So, and then, yeah, so just, and reducing the requirements overall, and really, asking people to tell us about themselves and about what things they think make them a good candidate, whether, and really expanding our own minds about that's an excellent skill that's easily transferable into our industry.
That's awesome. That's great.
I'm not sure, Darian, it's as easy as changing job descriptions, though, right?
No,
because
exactly.
the process of applying for a job in tech is a barrier in and of itself. I would imagine if you're, if I know how to apply for jobs because my parents taught me how. My kids know how to apply for jobs because they taught, I taught them how. And in many cases, open doors for youth in my life, introduce them to important people who can give them a job. And I'm the mother of a tradesperson, and the way that he got the job is not the same way I've ever gotten any job that I got. He showed up on site where at a place that he wanted to work, and he showed his tickets, and they had him at work the next day, right? So I do think there's again, when we think about our own individual privilege and the ways that we know about how to interact with the workplace that we know, that having conversations to ask yourselves a question like, how do you know what you know about how to find a job in tech, is an important part of this as well.
That's amazing. So how would you, again, let's go Magic One. How would you, across BC, how would you get that education to people of how to apply for a job? And I love Josh's idea, because I know Josh is going to print down the road at whatever, Vista Print, he's going to print all these posters that like, you can do this, right? And a photo of Josh's head winning.
That's BC. My saying. Can I get a better marketer here? I'm firing marketer.
Holding your marketer of the year award, like, you can do that, whatever that. I love that idea. I don't know how that's going to look. Maybe that's commercials or videos or showing Indigenous people doing tech. Like, that'd be amazing. But Helen, what would you think as far as the job application interview skills? How do we empower people with that? Indigenous people.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're doing it like one conversation at a time, right? Being in the places that we need to be in to have the conversations that we need to have with the people that we need to have. I mean, when I think about, it's I'm reminded that Josh started at Crystal Decisions. So did I. Crystal Decisions, bore a lot of fruit for the BC tech sector. But we know how to have conversations with people and identify right off the bat if they have the capability to do good work. We don't need to see a resume to determine that, right? It's pretty obvious to many of us that recruit talent, you know, what critical thinking looks like when you have a conversation with someone, what a great attitude looks like, what someone who's committed to continuous learning in their life and, you know, their work looks like. So, you know, it doesn't sound very scalable, but, you know, but why wouldn't we start there?
That's amazing. I'm going to just open up if people have questions. We only use these last 10 minutes for questions here. But just as we go to that, Josh, any kind of closing thoughts, anything that you wish, you know, you're this afternoon looking back and I wish I'd said this. Anything else that you want to leave with?
Not answering the magic wand questions because my mom's wicked and I don't want to get involved in all that witch stuff. So no way. Too close to Halloween. I've watched a lot of horror movies and know how this works, so I won't do that. But I will say I really liked what Helen said, that you're right. It is a lot of work, and it's hands-on, and it's about learning. It's about a lifetime commitment to learning. I mean, I think what's for me as a Métis person, it's about learning about, you know, colonization is about becoming like being one of the forgotten generation of Métis, which is kind of what, if you don't know about Métis, watch Google Rosie and Métis, and a 6-year-old girl walks you through the entire timeline of the Métis people. It's amazing for 6 years old. I wish you'd teach me how to be a public speaker. She's amazing. And just always thinking about, you know, how to learn more and to have those conversations. And I think a good first start is let's get some people here to go to places to speak to youth, to speak to communities that are outside of tech, and to just let them know how you can apply for a job in tech, how it works, what you need to work on, what you need to do, because we need there's a very good program through Erica can remind me the name of it, I forget, that I sponsor, as well as I think SAP does.
Hyper Talent program.
Hyper Talent, where we talk to teachers from K to 12, and it's about educating teachers so they can get educated and they can at least point people to the resources to say, you know, that'd be great. We should be talking about when we have entrepreneurs coming out of Mid-Island or Cranbrook or outside of where we already have lots, to say, hey, look, they did that. Maybe we could connect you with them, and you can, or they can speak to your class. And, you know, I love the comments saying it is great. Remote work, being able to work remotely has leveled the playing field a little bit, and shown that we can work with people all over BC and without having them to move here, which is also a big barrier and can be a big cultural barrier as well. If you have to work where you live, to say, no, you have to move to Vancouver or Victoria, which are both very expensive.
That's awesome. Michaelin, closing thoughts, any mic drop moments for us here?
So large orgs is my perspective. I would say think about partnering, think about your procurement practices, think about, please pay everyone. I can't tell you how many times that people who are so used to getting a regular paycheck are like, oh, sure, we'll just bring in so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah, we're paying them, right? I guess. So think of those things for sure. That's what I would say. And then also, like, make sure you have senior leadership commitment, and make sure they understand this is not just like a one and done. It's not like that turn on and off on the one day of orange shirt. It's a long process. Make sure they're super committed and they understand that it's a full disruption. Like, it's not just performative. There's another P. And then also make sure that it's not only senior people at the table. Like, you really need to bring in all those voices. But if you're going to bring in people who are underrepresented, make sure they're not taking all the action items, and that they're going to be, again, rewarded for this this participation, so that, you know, they're not sacrificing their own careers because they're trying to do the right thing. Okay, that's it.
That's great. Thank you. And Helen, over to you.
Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity here for government, potentially the Ministry of Education, to think about education in a more holistic, non-school based environment, not just for Indigenous youth, but for other youth who don't respond well to an academic program. And, there are companies like Germany that do provide a university credential using an apprenticeship model. That provides youth with hands-on experience. And the downside to the conversation about education is it does provide a bar to measure the qualifications that someone has coming into an organization. And even tradespeople need forklift tickets and certifications to work on heavy equipment and things like that. And this is a barrier. This academic only approach is a barrier for all types of talent coming into the technology industry, not just Indigenous. And that's probably a conversation we need to have at a higher level as well.
That's great. And I think the good news is that education is looking at micro-credentials more and are dabbling there and trying things and kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall, I think, at the moment. So that's it's very exciting in that. But I think, yeah, we're definitely a few years off. But Erica, over to you. We've got 8 minutes left. If any questions came to you, or if there's anything else that BC Tech wants to share specifically, maybe about digital lift or ways that maybe people were like, well, what is this digital lift thing? I want to know more about this, because Jen's like, this has been amazing. I'm so inspired. I want to get involved. And Pamela is also thinking the exact same thing.
Thanks, Darian. Well, yeah, thanks. A really heartfelt thank you to all 4 of you on the panel. We're really lucky, as you mentioned, to have your organizations as well as 12 other corporate partners who work alongside BC Tech on our Digital Lift program. Essentially, Digital Lift's goal is to help underrepresented groups make pathways into tech careers. And we do that through 2 streams. So one is through reskilling programs. We're really fortunate also to work with Darian and his team to help provide scholarships for Indigenous participants to go through digital marketing programs to reskill into tech jobs. We have a web development program we run as well as many others throughout the year to help give people those pathways and smooth the path to those jobs in tech. On the other side of the program, we also have a tech internship program. We're really pleased to work with our Digital Lift partners and many of our BC Tech members to find placements in tech companies for underrepresented individuals to get that first step into a tech career. And we're really pleased to provide subsidies to support those placements as well. So more than happy, if anyone on the call wants to reach out to me, I'll drop my email in the chat. It'd be great to have you connect with me afterwards if you'd like to get involved in the program in any way.
Erica, that's awesome. And I can attest to the program. We, this last year, I think 35 Indigenous students went through our credentialing program. They graduated with 11 micro-credentials from Facebook, Google, and Hootsuite. Best Buy came alongside out of Burnaby and gave them all brand new laptops and cell phones, and every one of them got a job in tech for the first time. And it was because of that, A, I think letting them know that this was an opportunity, B, giving them actual credentials they could do in 6 weeks part-time. Most of them actually were doing a job or were taking care of a project back at home. And so it was really cool to do that. And in the end, get them some really good hardware. So it's happening. But I think on the flip side, I think what everyone has shared well is now that we got them into tech, it's like, are they ready? Are they comfortable? Even small things like which holidays are celebrated here, like which, stat holidays are celebrated. It was kind of an awkward situation to be like, you get a day off to celebrate Victoria Day, that Queen Victoria that you love so much and have a picture of in your house. And it's like, there's a bit of a miss there. So I think organizations are slowly figuring out, like, how do we even wrestle with stat holidays? And do we provide bereavement for aunties? And what is an auntie? Why does this, someone asks, why does this new employee from Jelly ask for time off because his aunt died? It's an aunt. Why is an aunt important to Indigenous person? And so providing that education, it sounds like small details, like what does an aunt mean? And maybe we should relook at stat holidays and switch them up, but all make a huge, huge impact for how safe and comfortable and awesome someone feels. And I'm going to throw this one more challenge out there. We're able to get them entry-level jobs, but what does it look like then once they have a job to mentor and lift them up into C-suite positions? And they could be, how do we create the next Josh? That's what I remember. Josh won this where I was at the TIAs. I don't know who else was at the TIAs, and there was those giant robots wandering around that were glowing, which was awesome. And then Josh wins this award. And I remember I was just crying and thinking, I was like, okay, who are the next Joshes, right? That are going to one day be in that position to be a leader, to be a C-suite, to be an owner of a tech company. So it was very, very moving experience for sure.